All right. All right, here let's begin again. We have the night of the Seder of Passover, right? So here is the Passover night. Here it goes like this. Oh, no, that's not what we want. This is what we want. Here. You start off the night of Passover, right? And you make kiddush. Then after that, you wash your hands and you eat a vegetable. It's called karpas. Then you break the middle matzah. And then you start off and say, this is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate, etc. Then the children ask the questions. And then you start to say, we were slaves to Paro in Egypt. Okay? So we see this is really the beginning of the Hagadda, the commandment of talking about going out of Egypt. All the rest is preliminaries, right? The child asks the questions. What makes this different, night different, brother? That he asks the questions. The beginning of the Hagadda is the answer that you give him, right? This is all part of the question. All the other nights we don't dip even once. Why are we dipping twice? On the other nights we eat chametz. Why do we eat only matzah? And all the other nights we eat any vegetables. Why only maor? And this night we eat sitting upright. Why do we recline? Right, etc. Why? It says, then we start the answer. Okay, says the Rebbe that this is really the beginning of the commandment of talking about going out of Egypt. How we were in Egypt for 210 years, how we got out of it. It says, but almost all of the commentators, they begin here, where it says this is the bread of affliction that our forefathers ate. Oh, so this must be a very important thing. 1 second, 1 minute. 1 minute. This must be, okay. So it says, Yesh Makom Lomar, we can say that the Hagadda begins with Kiddush. We said that before. Just like we wrote a lot of the commentaries, that why we don't make a blessing on going on this, it's a commandment to talk about going out of Egypt. On all commandments, you make a blessing. Why is it that on this commandment that we're doing of talking about going out of Egypt, we're not making a blessing? Why? So some people say that the kiddush that we make on wine in the beginning, that's the blessing. That's the blessing when we make kiddush. But the first Rebbe of Chabad, he gives a different answer. He says, and here's a parenthetical story. My father-in-law, the previous Rebbe of Chabad, the sixth Rebbe of Chabad, he said that his father was the fifth Rebbe of Chabad. He once, he asked his father, why is it that we don't make a blessing on this commandment of talking about going out of Egypt? And his father didn't know exactly what to tell him. So it's, I'm sorry. No, his father asked him, can you tell me why you don't make a blessing? He was just a small child. Why don't we make a blessing? And he didn't know what he had to answer. So he said, you tell me, Daddy. And his father said that, he said, well, when I was a young child, my father also asked me, the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, this question, and I also didn't know what to ask. And he said that the fact is his father, the fourth Rebbe of Chabad, said that when he was a child, he asked his father, that Tzemach Tzedek, that's who we just learned the mimer from, Tzemach Tzedek, that same question. Why don't we make a blessing on the Hagadda, saying the Hagadda is a commandment? And he also didn't know what to answer. So he said that Tzemach Tzedek said that when he was small, he asked his grandfather, the Admor Zakin, the one who wrote the Tanya, and he said that when he didn't know, his grandfather asked him also the question. And when he didn't know, so his father said, his grandfather said, just like we don't make a blessing on Birkat HaMazon. To say blessing after you eat bread is also a commandment, and we don't make a blessing on that blessing. Why? Because what seems that his intention of the first Rebbe, he said that the Hagadda itself is a big blessing. And therefore, you don't make a blessing for a blessing. Just like you don't make a blessing on Birkat HaMazon. So there's two answers we have. Why do we don't make a blessing on the Hagadda that we're saying the night of Passover? One is because the Kiddush was the blessing. The other answer is that the whole entire Hagadda is one big blessing. And you don't make a blessing on a blessing. We're thanking God. The first Rebbe of Chabad mentioned, then the second Rebbe of Chabad, he mentioned that was the son of the first Rebbe. He mentioned the Rif, Rev Alfasi, and he brings that the blessing of the Kiddush, the Kiddush, and the Rashba also says Shlomo ben Aderet, also one of the big commentaries of the Talmud. He says it's mentioned. All you have to do is say anything about going out of Egypt, and that's enough. So you'll make a blessing on it. But the first Rebbe of Chabad, he asked a question on that it's an obligation. This is the obligation every day. Every day we have a commandment to go out of Egypt. It's a commandment, and we don't make a blessing on that. But the talking about going out of Egypt, which is in the night of Passover, this is not just mentioning God took us out of Egypt, but this is a big, long story. Just like if you ever looked at the blessing that we make after eating bread, we don't just say thank you, God, for giving bread. We say thank you, God, you feed everything and you provide for everyone, and you brought us the land of Israel. You gave us to the land of Israel. Thank you very much, and we are grateful. It's very long, right? The blessing. And so the same thing with the going out of Passover, the blessing of talking on night of Passover. It's very long, but it's one big blessing. According to this, now we can understand that according to the Alter Rebbe, and therefore the Kiddush that we make is not part of the Hagadda itself. It's preceding the Hagadda. It's not a blessing on the mitzvah. It's just a blessing on the time, on the day. Therefore, the beginning of the explanation of the rabbis on the Hagadda comes from Hey Lach Ma'anya. That's the beginning. Okay, according to this, we can understand that Hey Lach Ma'anya, this begins the Hagadda. Now we can understand why it ends up with, now we are here. Next year, we are going to be in the land of Israel. Now we are slaves. Next year, we are going to be free. Why? It says because this is part of the whole topic of the Hagadda of Passover, that we are not yet in the land of Israel, no one, and we are not yet free. Why not? Because the Kapashuta simply that it has no connection to this whole thing about the Hagadda, where we are now, where we're going to be next year. The Hagadda is talking about what happened back there 3,000 years ago. We have to remind and give thanks that we're free now, right? Now we are free. So what are we saying? Now we're not free. Now we're serving. But this must be this thing about saying now we're here, next year we're going to be in Israel. This is a topic in itself. That in the days of exile in Babylon, they said it because it was because of the poor people that they didn't have all the necessities of Passover. So therefore, you had to finish and say, "Come, anyone who didn't have, come and eat." What's the connection to the whole thing of now we are slaves and let's go next year? So before we start Avodim Hayim, before we actually start talking about going out of Egypt, so we have this one paragraph that's what we talked about last week. Remember this one paragraph that says, "This is the bread of affliction that we ate. Anyone who wants to come, please come and eat. Now we are slaves. Next year we'll be free. And now we are in exile. Next year we'll be in Israel." This was made for talking about the people in Babylon. It's not talking about us. But if we say no, if we say that this whole thing is part of the Hagadda and not just some sort of a preceding paragraph, now we can understand the whole idea of going out of Egypt began. This was the beginning of a big process, which is not going out of Egypt. Going out of Egypt was just a process that has not finished yet. The process, and until we finish it, we're still in Egypt. The real truly going out of Egypt is the future redemption. Like it says in the days of going out of Egypt, all the days of going out of Egypt, I will show you miracles. Remember, that's the mimer we just learned. That every single day since we left Egypt 3,336 years ago is going out of Egypt. Then we left Egypt physically, but truly going out of Egypt, we haven't gone out yet. It seems we're not in slavery anymore. It says when the future redemption comes and Mashiach brings all the Jews, builds the third temple, brings all the Jews to Israel, then we'll realize that all of the days that we thought we were out of Egypt, we were really in deep exile. And even the Jews that are living in Israel, we weren't really in Israel. Israel is supposed to be a land where you feel God. It says there'll be big miracles. So therefore, the whole entire Hagadda is talking about us right now. We are slaves right now in Egypt, and we're talking about how to go out. Therefore, it says, listen to this, it's good to make some sort of a remembrance on the second day of Passover. The second day of Passover, by us, it's going to be what's called Chol Hamoed. By people outside of Israel, there's 2 days, 2 first days. So for the second day, you have to make some sort of a remembrance of the meal that Esther made, where Haman got hung. Remember that this was on this day. This was the day that Haman got hung. You know the story, just 1 minute for what happened on Purim. What happened on Purim? First of all, Purim was about 900 years after the Jews got out of Egypt. About 900 years. Purim was 900 years after the Jews got out of Egypt. And all that time, the Jews sort of sunk more and more and more into being natural and normal. And it reached its total depth right before Purim. Right before Purim, all the Jews gave up on the redemption. Purim was right before the second temple was built. Right before the second temple was built. But the Jews gave up on the whole business. They said it was too long and the 70 years already finished. There was supposed to be 70 years of exile. And according to some calculations, the 70 years already passed. And they gave up the whole business. Came along Haman, which was like on the first day, right in the beginning of the month of Nisan. And he made this decree to kill all the Jews. Everybody, everyone in the world was supposed to kill as many Jews as you could. And the Jews didn't have any right to defend themselves. They would check in the houses of Jews. There weren't any weapons. And Haman was happy. Oh, he was happy. And Esther made a meal. And he went to a meal with her and Haman alone. And Haman thought he was now going to be elevated to some big position or something. He didn't know that Esther was a Jew. The king didn't know. Anyway, they made this meal. And suddenly it happened that the night before the meal, the king had a dream, and he dreamed that he woke up and he opened up his history book, whatever his diary, and he realized that years earlier that Mordechai saved his life. And when the meal came, all of a sudden everything turned around. Esther revealed herself, I'm a Jew, and Haman and Mordechai saved your life. Right? That was revealed right before that. And somebody wants to kill me. And the king said, someone wants to kill you. You're my wife. You're a Jew. Mordechai is a Jew. I saved my life. Who wanted to do it? Haman. He said, oh, Haman. And came along somebody. Some people say it was Elijah the prophet. And he said, see, there's this big gallows. The king said, yeah, I wonder what that was. You know, it's like 75, it's like 8 stories high, this gallows. That was the gallows that Haman made for Mordechai. And the king said, you know what? I got a good idea, epiphany. Take Haman and hang him on the gallows that he prepared for Mordechai. That's a pretty good idea. And all of a sudden, everything just turned around and Haman got killed. When did this all happen? One day, the whole thing turned around. It was the second day of Passover. The Jewish people fasted for 3 days. That year, they didn't eat on Passover. The second day of Passover, okay. So we should give an honorable mention on that day. Today's the day that Haman was hung and that the miracle of Purim really began. Right? The king gave permission to the Jews to defend themselves. At first glance, it's not understood. The miracle of Purim, this is a secondary miracle. It doesn't really take up any place, the miracle of Passover. In Passover, there was amazing miracles. God split the sea on the 7th day of Passover. With Passover, the Jews left Egypt. Millions of Jews, they all left slavery. And what happened on Purim? There was a big danger and it stopped. A big danger and it stopped the danger. But there was no actual physical danger. Nobody saw. They weren't enslaved and they got out. The physical, there was no change whatsoever. Just there was a decree and there wasn't a decree. Purim is incomparably nothing compared to Passover. In the exile, the going out of Egypt on Passover, this was a gula shlema. This was a total redemption. All the Jews got out, which is not the case of Purim. Purim, it says we're still slaves of Achashverosh. If so, what's the connection of Purim to Passover? So now we can understand what it is. Just like we find that there is something special in Purim over the giving of the Torah. Like it says that when the Jews on Purim, this is the first time that the Jews were self-sacrificing in the history of Judaism. The first time all the Jews were self-sacrificing, right? All the Jews said, if we just say we're not Jews, Haman can't hurt us. The decree is to kill all the Jews. Not one Jew even thought to say, I'm not a Jew. Like it says, Kimu v'kiblu, that the Jews finally fulfilled what they accepted at Mount Sinai. So it is also an advantage on Purim. So Purim in some ways is better than receiving the Torah. So Purim in some ways is better than going out of Egypt. Why? Because this is a preparation. Pesach is a preparation for receiving the Torah. So the whole thing built up to receiving the Torah. And the Torah really was not received until the holiday of Purim, 900 years later. Like it says, the whole reason that God took the Jews out of Egypt was to receive the Torah. And the Jewish people didn't really receive the Torah internally, in other words, self-sacrifice for the Torah, until the holiday of Purim. Yetzias Mitzrayim, going out of Egypt and receiving the Torah, everything was done from above to below. God did all the miracles. Going out of Egypt, God revealed himself, the King of the Kings of Kings, Melech Malchei Amlachim, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God himself revealed. Giving to the Torah says that God forced them to receive the Torah. And says he held a mountain over them. Some say a mountain of love, which is not the case, the miracle of Purim. The miracle of Purim, it came by means of the service of the Jewish people. The Jewish people, they did it from below to above. There was no miracles on Purim. On Purim, it seemed that God had left the Jews. All of a sudden, there was a tremendous decree only on the Jews. Being a Jew was the worst thing you could be in the world, was to be a Jew. And not just the Jews that were in Europe, like in the time of Hitler, or the Jews even in the time of Paro, that he wanted to only kill the males. The decree on Purim was to kill all the Jews. The worst thing in the world was to be a Jew. And the easiest thing you could do to get out of this, you want to call it, the terrible identity of Jew, just say, I'm not Jewish. And all of the Jews, without exception, refused to deny their Judaism. The whole thing that happened on Purim was from below to above. They had absolutely no reason to be Jews. No reason. It was only bad. It was only going to be a curse. The whole world was against them. No one was for them. They didn't see any miracles whatsoever. And suddenly they realized that, hey, we're Jews. We've lost everything, but we can't lose that. They can take everything from us, but they can't take our Judaism from us unless we take it from ourselves. Suddenly on Purim, that was an arousal from below. Sha'amdu Shana Shlema, that they were in the one full year in what's called Masirut Nefesh. The decree of Haman was 1 year before it was supposed to be carried out. Right? 1 year, there was a command to kill all the Jews, and that stood for 1 full year. Haman was killed right in the beginning, but the king said, I can't take away a decree. I made a decree. I can't start rescinding decrees. I'll just give you the right to defend yourself. But the Jews were outnumbered 500 to 1. Not one Jew thought to deny his Judaism. That was from below to above. If so, there was even though that there is a big advantage, of course, when God does everything and when we do it, because what we can do, we're just creations. We're limited. It's not complete, which is not the case. If there's an arousal from above, then God can do everything. But that's Passover and getting the Torah, they're greater. But nevertheless, there still is something better in arousal from below. Do you remember, people? We just finished learning the mimer. I hope we're not going too fast, but we just finished learning the mimer from the Rebbe. Remember? And he said, why is it we're going to mention going out of Egypt and the future redemption? Future redemption is going to be incomparably greater and more miraculous than going out of Egypt. So because the idea of going out of Egypt, basically what that is now is an arousal from below, that we have to go out of Egypt every day. True, the first day God took us out, but all the other days that we're in exile, that's what's called eskafia. We have to force ourselves. Remember we learned that? That's what's called an arousal from below. And that in some way it's better than all the miracles that God can do from above. Why? Because when God does everything on its own, ein lokim, it doesn't last in a person. We see it by the Jews. God did everything, took them out of Egypt, split the sea, gave them the Torah, and 40 days afterwards, they worshiped the golden calf. If God does everything, it's not in the people's personalities. Because they didn't have any preparation for this from their acceptance. They didn't accept it, which is not the case if the Jews do the work from below. That's the whole thing of Purim. Therefore, we mention Purim on Passover, because Passover is just symbolizing the beginning of going out of Egypt. And the whole 3,336 years from then is our work from below. That's the thing of Purim, our efforts from below. And therefore, there's these two qualities. God from above gives a light from above, that he does the miracles, and which is unlimited. And also, it should be permanent because we did it from below. That's why they had to be both. Why does it have to be on the second day of Passover? This we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. And now, Yom Yom.